Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm so pleased that you have joined me for today's show. Today, we're exploring the location-specific tenancy guidelines for the U.S. Territory of Puerto Rico. In all of my location-specific episodes, I've included hyperlinks and resources of all kinds for the location that we're looking at. Today, we're looking at the Puerto Rico landlord-tenant relationships regarding residential dwellings. You're going to see this is kind of different here because I'm not really sure. It's because it's a U.S. territory, so this is interesting. But each of my location-specific podcasts is set up the exact same way, answering the same 4 questions. What are the basics of the location that we're studying? What are the nuances about this location? What stands out? And then 3, what is some of the guidance about abandoned items left behind by tenants in Puerto Rico? And then lastly, where do you get help in your local area? Where do you even start regarding tenancy in Puerto Rico? Now, I must tell you that there are more guiding documents, there are more resources than what I am giving you here. This is not everything. This is giving you a running start. You need to do your own research for yourself. There may be nuances where you might need to be licensed as a landlord. You might need to have certain things as a landlord. Or in this case, there's a lot of references regarding being a renter in Puerto Rico, as you'll see. So this episode is not all inclusive. You must research further in your specific area for your specific case, but today's episode will at least get you started. I also want to give a plug for today's sponsor, Aloha Capital Investments, LLC. If you want to know more about real estating, if you've ever wanted to check it out, look in the website, alohajv.com. All right, let me do this. For those of you who have seen location-specific episodes before on the podcast, you'll know that I've got the same framework for every one of them, and then I'm going to share screens. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go through the hyperlinks that are in the description of this episode right now. So I'm sharing screen for the rental laws and tenant rights in Puerto Rico. Now, this is stateregstoday.com. This is kind of a generic website that they have them for all 50 states. This is typically a US based one. They have them for Canada as well, but because Puerto Rico is a US territory, this is a little different. You're going to see this. Normally, when I start with the resources, it is more legal, right? There's like a legal act. This one doesn't have necessarily an act. There is apparently a residential act, and I looked and looked and looked and even offered to pay to get a copy of it. Couldn't find it. So you're going to see that most of the tenancy issues in Puerto Rico are contract-based, meaning that they have been addressed by a court of law. And so there's guidance to it, which is kind of different than an act. Very interesting. Let me go through some of this. And you're going to see that because Puerto Rico is in the Caribbean gets hit with hurricanes. We'll talk about some storms. But let's go through this main one, and then I'm going to get into some of the other resources because they get kind of funny about tax incentives and if you're going to move to Puerto Rico, about renting and how to choose the right rental. And this is really different. If you have listened to any of my other location-specific episodes, this one is not straightforward. It's kind of different because it's not just an open book. I have multiple resources, and it's sort of like, I don't know, kind of look here and look here. It is really not cut and dry, much like many of the other ones are. This one's not. So key rental laws and tenant rights in Puerto Rico, they're saying everything, leases, rental agreements should be in writing, should include certain items like the property address, duration of the lease, rent amount due, security deposit, any other agreed upon terms. This is kind of vague, right? Like, wait till you see here. Rent control. Puerto Rico does not have statewide rent control laws, but certain municipalities have enacted their own rent control ordinances. How would you know? You've got to do your own homework regardless of what city you are in as a landlord, or if you're a tenant, you've got to do more research than what I'm giving you here. Security deposits, limited to 1 month's rent as security deposit for an apartment or a single family home. If it's a commercial property, which right now we're just talking about dwellings and housing units, but if it is a commercial property you're renting, then it would be 2 months. But let's keep it to dwellings. It's 1 month. Rent increases. Landlords can increase rent with prior notice to tenant, usually 30 days for a month-to-month lease, or at the end of a fixed term lease, but the notice period appears to be 30 days. Now, it doesn't say how often you can increase the rent. It doesn't say how much you can increase the rent. There's no rent control, so it looks like with proper notice, you can increase it to whichever you'd like. Take note of that. Repairs and maintenance, landlords are responsible for the habitability. And then if the landlord fails to do that, tenants may have legal recourse. Right to privacy, discrimination, eviction. Landlords must follow legal process to evict a tenant in Puerto Rico. Everything's got to be in written notice and go through the court system. Deposit returns, anything regarding returning deposits is all about how much time and what kind of documentation do you have to provide. And so in Puerto Rico, it looks like within 30 days after the lease ends, unless there are damages that are withholding, but you have to justify the withholding. Termination of the lease, tenants have the right to terminate their lease early if there is a serious safety or health hazard on the property and landlord fails to address. That's a little bit different than just terminating a lease. If there's a reason why the tenant is departing, that makes sense. So landlord retaliation, for those of you who listened to my location specific podcast in the past, landlord retaliation is always about the time. There's a time from a certain event until a landlord can either evict, rent increase, reduce the rent, or do something retaliatory or that is viewed retaliatory against a tenant who has either enforced code violation, created a tenants association, done something against the landlord that would appear retaliatory. In Puerto Rico, it says it's illegal for landlords to retaliate against tenants who exercise their legal rights, such as complaining about code violations or joining a tenants union. There is no time limit, though. So it looks like for the length of the tenancy, the landlord cannot retaliate. Okay, there we go. Tenant remedies. Tenants have the right to seek legal remedies if they believe their rights have been violated by their landlord. And they can also file a complaint in Puerto Rico Department of Consumer Affairs or taking legal action in court. Okay, so Puerto Rico, remember, fair housing and discrimination against, not discriminating against tenants is a federal law, which would include Puerto Rico. And so this fair housing law of Puerto Rico would apply. It's the US one as well, prohibits landlords from discriminating against any of the protected classes. And that would include familial status. And so it just, let's see, some ways Puerto Rico protects tenants against landlord discrimination, and housing includes prohibited discriminatory practices, anything fair housing, which makes sense. Tenants who believe that they've been discriminated against, they can make a complaint at the Office of the Commissioner of Financial Institutions. That's kind of an interesting one. Conducting investigations, education and awareness, offering legal assistance. So that same Office of the Commissioner of Financial Institutions also can offer legal advice as well. In conclusion, according to this site, it says Puerto Rico has strict laws and measures in place to protect tenants from landlord discrimination in housing, and they're promoting to create equal access to quality housing for all individuals, regardless of their characteristics or sources of income. All right. Legal requirements for landlord-tenant disputes in Puerto Rico. Now, granted, I'm reading this off a website. Like, I don't have an act or a legal document or a guide that's created by Legal Aid. You're going to see this. This is just a website that I had found because I had Googled Puerto Rico tenancy laws, and this is what I found. So you've got in here, notice of termination, security deposit, written lease agreement, habitability standards, rent control laws. A lot of this is repeating what we had said up above. Specific protections for renters. Yes, reasonable accommodation if someone needs, handlebars put in or a ramp put in. Accessibility requirements, there's that. Accessible common areas. Emergency evacuation plans. This is unique to somewhere that has natural disasters such as hurricanes or wind events. Emergency evacuation plans include landlords of multifamily buildings must develop emergency evacuation plans for residents with disabilities to ensure that these plans are readily available upon request. One of the also, let's see, so it's talking about request assistance animals, enforcement, eviction process, anything that is a dispute will go to court. It's just a matter of which court and how do you get there. Eviction process in Puerto Rico is governed by Civil Code and Landlord-Tenant Act. Again, I tried to get a copy of this act and I couldn't get a hold of it. So I kind of just have to go with what I can find. And I mean, I can Google same as you. This is a really bizarre situation that there isn't anything more than this for Puerto Rico. But notice to quit. Before an eviction can take place, landlord must provide tenant written notice to quit, stating the reasons for eviction, giving them a specific time frame to vacate the property or to remedy the situation. Minimum notice is 5 business days, month-to-month tenancies, or 30 days for year-long tenancies or longer-term tenancies. Court hearings, writ of possession, filing eviction lawsuit, tenant's right to appeal. It goes on and on how this would work. Talks a little bit about lease agreements. Can a landlord legally refuse to rent to a tenant based on their source of income in Puerto Rico? The answer is yes. A landlord can legally refuse to rent to a tenant based on their source of income in Puerto Rico, but according to Puerto Rico's anti-discrimination laws, landlords are allowed to establish a reasonable criteria for evaluating prospective tenants, including income requirements, and the standards have to be applied to everyone. It can't just be picking and choosing. So as long as the criteria are consistently applied and without any form of discrimination on any other characteristic, landlords have the right to choose which tenants they want to rent their property based on various factors, and source of income is one of them. Smoking may be another one. There's a couple other different ones. Laws for security deposits in Puerto Rico. Is there a limit on how much a landlord can charge? No specific limit is set on the maximum a landlord can charge, but it's commonplace. So it's common practice to charge the equivalent of 1 month's rent as security deposit. And then you've got to return within 30 days. We talked about this. And if you're going to take deductions, you've got to provide an itemized list of deductions and return the balance. Are tenants allowed to make repairs and deduct the cost of the rent not being made by the landlord? It depends on the local area. Again, you want to check with whatever city you're in Puerto Rico. That's important too, because it just depends. You might want to also, it's saying here, you also want to check your lease and consult your lawyer or local housing authority before taking action. That's true. I think that's true anywhere, not just in Puerto Rico. So now they're saying that Puerto Rico does have rent controls in place. This is why it gets so confusing. The laws are governed by the Puerto Rico Department of Housing. So it says it does have rent controls, but it just depends on the location. The government can establish, under these regulations, the government can establish specific maximum rent amounts that landlords are allowed to charge for rental units. The government can also set rule for how rents can be increased and requires landlords to provide notice before they do so. And this is called the Rent Regulation Act. Again, I looked for all of these. I could not find them. And, you know, I'm not perfect, but I looked quite a bit for all this, could not find them, didn't get a copy of them. Are there any limits on how much a landlord can increase rent each year? There's no statewide rent control law. We said this. So landlords can increase the rent as much as they want, whenever they want. However, landlords must give tenants written notice of the increase at least 30 days. And in some municipalities, again, there may be rent stabilization ordinances that may limit the annual rent increases. You've got to check your local government, regardless if you're a landlord or a tenant. You've got to know the rules of what you're playing, the game you're playing here. How does subleasing work under Puerto Rico's rental laws? This is stating it's subleasing is common where tenants rent their unit to another person. It's called a subtenant. And but the landlord has to consent. You still have to consent with a sublease. And there's details on how to do the sublease, the termination of the sublease. And there's retaliation. It talks a little bit about this. I'm not going to read through all this. I'd actually rather skip to the other resources. Well, this is one. This is interesting. Are there any special provisions or protections for college students renting off-campus housing in Puerto Rico, meaning they're not in a dorm on the school grounds? So there do not appear to be any specific provisions or protection for college students. So once you're a renter, you're a renter. If you're renting off campus, then you're still a renter. Do landlords have the right to enter a tenant's unit without notice under the rental laws? No, you still have to provide proper notice. They're saying the amount of notice required may vary, but it's typically at least 24 hours, even where in locations I've seen 24 hours. We try to give as much notice as possible, even several days. You're going to see coming up, I'm recording for Florida very soon. Florida only requires 12 hours. Puerto Rico, it looks like standard practice is 24. So take a look. You still have to give proper notice and you have to be entering for some good reason. You can't just want to go in. Okay, let's see, as we go through this, domestic violence. If there is some kind of Emergency or some kind of threatening item, whether it's domestic violence or a threat of something else like bodily harm, a threat of bodily harm, will it impact the rights of both victims and perpetrators within the rental housing laws in Puerto Rico? The answer is going to be yes. It is going to impact you. Rights of victims, they have a right to safety, a right to privacy, a right to seek help, right to reasonable accommodation, right to terminate the lease early, which makes sense. You shouldn't get penalized for if there is a documented domestic violence case, then you can give notice, and then confidentiality is another one. So that was a list of victims' rights. And then there's also the rights of the perpetrators, which is really interesting. Due process rights, right to protection against discrimination, limited eviction protections. Let's see, mandatory counseling or treatment and potential loss of rights. So there is some specific laws and regulations in place if someone wants to buy the unit from the landlord, if you want to rent to own. So according to this, it's saying Puerto Rico has specific laws and regulations in place for rent to own contracts or agreements. Under Act 83 of 2010, also known as the Law of Rental with Option to Buy or Rent to Own Agreements, landlords and tenants are required to enter in a written contract. Well, of course, you want to do that anyway. Okay, and that's the end of this resource. Let me switch to the next one. So you've got that is the state regs one. Now there is another one in here. Now I'm just going through them in order, as you'll see in the description of this episode. There is one that says relocate to PuertoRico.com, what you need to know about renting in Puerto Rico. So this is an article. Again, this is not my norm. If you've seen this, I normally have the tenancy laws and all kinds of guides, and like there's none of that. It was very weird. So this seems like it is more tenant centric. This is if you're going to rent in Puerto Rico, what do you do? Renting in Puerto Rico first makes sense. Don't wait too long to buy a property in Puerto Rico, meaning if you're moving to Puerto Rico and you want to buy, you want to live there, then you would rent. And then this article is coaching you where to rent in Puerto Rico, different locations, short-term versus long-term. Other ways to search for Puerto Rico rentals, whether it's Clasificados online, Zillow, negotiating a lease agreement, issues with landlord, areas that are great to live in Puerto Rico, and of course, real estate brokerage services for this. And of course, you keep going down, there's lots of different guidance that this article is giving you. You can take it or leave it. I have no idea. I don't know how to screen this kind of stuff, but they're making guidance on this, saying, is the rental unit in a state of disrepair? Is it lacking air conditioning? Does it have sufficient power outlets? Okay, I mean, some of this is kind of basic as finding a unit, but if you're moving to Puerto Rico, unfortunately, this is all I had to go on. Language of habitability. Now, this might apply to a landlord offering housing. The law in Puerto Rico says very little about habitability standards for rental properties. So work such language into your contract, meaning your lease agreement. Confirm that the landlord will provide you a reliable source of electricity, hot and cold running water, working windows and doors, and a pest-free environment, basically a habitable unit. And include language that allows you to break the contract if the landlord refuses to provide a habitable dwelling as specified in the contract. I think that is standard. And if there is any issues, you want to make sure it's all in writing, of course. So there is a couple of other guidance things down here about issues with landlords. Verify the landlord makes regular payments on their mortgage. I'm not really sure how you would do that regardless of the location that you would make. Like, how on earth would I, as a tenant, verify my landlord makes regular payments on the mortgage? That is very interesting. Also, verify whether the landlord plans to sell the property during a lease. A rule in Puerto Rico allows a new owner to break existing contracts with tenants. Interesting. Well, I don't know if that's true, but again, I have nothing but articles to go off of, so I don't have a source document. Great areas to live in. I'm just going to keep going as we go through this. So the next one I have is judicial. This is all about the judicial branch of Puerto Rico. And so this was about the education aspect and judicial eviction proceedings about doing an eviction in Puerto Rico. And so this is about as formal as I've seen regarding Puerto Rico housing. So this is eviction. It's talking about what an eviction is and how that you can actually file with this. legal process. And so there's got all these drop-down menus that you can actually go to. Of course, you can see they've got to file a complaint with the court. You may use the complaint for eviction. Now, this is a hyperlink. I'm just going to open this in a new tab and see what this looks like. So this one is in Spanish. There is very likely one in English here too, if you'd prefer. And it's a template. You actually can fill it out yourself. It's check boxes, and so you can fill the whole thing out. So it's a complaint for eviction service, and then it's $60 if the defendant is in non-payment. So if you're filing for an eviction action as a landlord in Puerto Rico, then you actually can do this. So there are some resources here as you go. What happens after you file a complaint for eviction with the court? Then it talks about serving if the defendant decides not to attend the hearing. What is ejection? Ejection is the act by which people who occupy a property are physically ordered to vacate. Basically, they are removed from the property. When can an eviction or ejection be carried out? As a rule, the ejection can be made on as the date which the judgment is final and unappealable. That is 5 days after filing, the copy of the notice of judgment is entered in the record if an appeal was not filed. However, where the court has determined that the family to be evicted is insolvent because they do not have sufficient needs, the ejection may be made after 20 days of notice of judgment. So this is different how this is all working. So the writ of possession to the landlord would be delayed if the family cannot pay or the tenant cannot pay. So this is really interesting how this all works. So there's a bunch of drop-down menus. It's not really a super how-to. There is more information. There are court forms, services and programs. This is kind of interesting about the judicial branch of Puerto Rico. And so there's all kinds of different legal topics in here. I just included the link to eviction in the description. Actually, that one's not coming up. Oh, legal topics. Here we go. So I'm just going to click on one of the other legal topics and see if we can get one of them to show up. Oh, that's community. Here we go. Information on legal issues. I'm going to click back into this. So if you go into Judicial Branch of Puerto Rico, community education, legal topics, it talks, there's more drop-down menus: government and court system, access to the courts, rights and duties, civil cases, criminal cases, family law cases, gender violence, common social problems. So this one, I think, if we look back, I'm actually going to go back because I want to make sure that I'm in the right location for what we would show as housing. So it is legal topics, it is civil cases, and then eviction. So I'm just going to go back one. I'm going to go back to civil cases. So instead of talking about eviction, only eviction. So, okay, so the courts in Puerto Rico hear both civil and criminal cases. So remember, Puerto Rico is small. It's not a big location. So they hear both civil and criminal cases. Civil cases begin when people go to court because they've not been able to resolve problems. On this page, you'll be able to access information about different civil proceedings. So this one, change of name, collection of money, eviction, and I don't know what that word is, executor. Let me click on that one because that's different. To be valid. I still don't know what that is. Interesting. Executor is a procedure for the legal recognition and validation and recognition of a foreign judgment. In other words, it is a mechanism that allows the validation of jurisdiction of judgments not issued in Puerto Rico. Interesting. So judgments entered in foreign countries, as well as those rendered in any U.S. jurisdiction, must be validated through this procedure. Interesting. Okay, sorry, I just went down that rabbit hole. So collection of money, here's one. So if you do an eviction, it looks like in Puerto Rico, if you do an eviction and you get the possession of the unit back and they've trashed the unit, then potentially you would do a second case where you would go collection of money. And so then is it a small claim? Is it a $15,000 or less? Or is it a larger claim? Looks like $15,000 or more. And it tells you exactly what you should do. What can they expect on the day of the hearing? Interesting. So there's only 4 types of civil cases. Looks like housing and eviction is one of them under that. So that is the judicial branch of Puerto Rico. So let's go to the next one. Oh, that was the form that we found. Now there's another one. I found a presentation. This is an IRS presentation that was put together in 2021. Now, I know that I'm grasping for straws here, but I don't have my normal source documents that I would normally go, here's the act, here's the guide, here's this, here's that, here's all these forms. I don't have that. I have some of it, but I don't have all of it. So this one I found is the IRS's, so that this is the tax department in the United States for all of my international listeners. This is the IRS, Internal Revenue Service from the US, that is talking about the advantages and the tax breaks of moving to Puerto Rico. Now, the reason why I put this in here is because I wanted to tell you that there's actually quite a bit of advantages for, here it is, global intangible low tax income and in Puerto Rico. And so it talks a little bit about U.S. income tax treatment of Puerto Rican residents. It's unique. It goes on and on. I'm not going to go through this. This has nothing to do with tenancy in Puerto Rico. It just has to do with taxes in Puerto Rico. So this was so different. I mean, when I'm just Googling for Puerto Rico and this pops up, of course I have to include it. Okay, so take a look at this if you want to know. This is tax advantages of Puerto Rico. And then, of course, I've included the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is the Puerto Rico location on the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, otherwise known as HUD. And there is a ton of resources on the HUD website talking about homelessness, affordable places to live, home ownership, reporting housing discrimination, rent relief and eviction, speaking to a housing counselor, housing quality and improved living conditions, disaster resources. So speaking to a housing counselor. Now, actually, I'm going to scroll back up because if you hit any one of these, it talks about what issue are you facing on the left and then where to get help on the right. So I want to make sure that you know that depending on your certain situation, you can potentially find some help here, if not in your local city where you are, if you are physically located in Puerto Rico. So this one is, this is about homelessness. And so there's all kinds of different locations that you can go for help. Puerto Rico Ombudsman, that was really interesting. Where can I find other resources for Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico Office for Ombudsman for the Elderly. The list of nonprofits, AARP, Elder Care Locator. Okay, then the next one is affordable places to live. So this is people that are just trying to live, find somewhere. Senior Citizens Guide, Housing Choice Voucher, portability. Let's see, what else do we have here? Rental complaints, bad landlords and housing complaints. Now, this is really interesting. Bad landlords, I'm going to go through this, but to report a bad landlord, this doesn't typically occur in the US per se. I know there's a lot of talk on Facebook and social media about, hey, I just evicted a really terrible tenant. Where can I put the name of this person to warn the next landlord? And unfortunately, you can't do that. That's not allowed. And so there is a couple of places that you can actually report bad landlords in federal housing. I'm actually going to open this in a new link so we can see what this is, but you can report a bad landlord in Puerto Rico. This one is rental assistance, HUD approved housing counselor, HUD resource. So, okay, this one is, so here's the answer. Typically in these location specific podcasts, I'm trying to make sure you have a spot to land. I'm not really sure what you would do other than walk into the city hall, or it says you can contact your local HUD office, or you can call the Fair Housing Act Resource Center by calling, this is toll free in the US, 1-800-225-5342, 800-225-5342, or you can email answers@hud.gov. This one, if you keep scrolling down on this one, unit manager landlord issues, you can look at local public housing agencies and make a complaint. But it says right here at the top, always inform your landlord or your manager about any issues you have with your unit. Don't just start waging complaints. But multifamily housing complaint hotline is 1-800-685-8470. I'm going to open this one too. This is just a little bit interesting. Again, it's not the normal thing, but multifamily housing complaint line is a service provided by HUD's Multifamily Housing Clearinghouse. Enables residents of HUD insured and assisted properties with their community members to ensure that there's not slumlords. But if you have a question, even if you're not HUD related, I'm betting that they would at least give you some kind of guidance. All right, I'm going to go back to the main role here. The other one you can find about rental complaints is Public Housing and Field Office Directory, and find government information about Puerto Rico. Here we go. So there's some other federal resources here. Official site of Puerto Rico government, Humane Society of Puerto Rico. You can see this is, again, it's so small that it doesn't seem to have a whole lot of specifically housing resources unless you're in government provided housing. Home ownership, if you're facing foreclosure, what do you end up doing? You can search, you can talk for a housing approved counselor. FHA loans, this is really if you're a veteran, VA home loans. Puerto Rico Department of Housing. Let's just go in here. I may add this resource. Now this is in Spanish. Translate to English. Let's see if it'll actually do this. I wonder if this will, it says translated. I don't, oh, it is. Okay, here we go. So yeah, I am going to include this in the write-up. Applications and regulations. Visit. Okay, maybe I found this here. Goodness sakes. Project management, program information center, requests application for final certification. This must be if you're building something. Project management, housing rehabilitation, so like a renovation. Interesting. Directory, materials help available at strategic planning, homes for sale. Notice of request for professional services and employment opportunities. I'm going to click here for more information. I'm going to open in a new tab, but I am going to include this, and in the hopes that this will work. Oh, no, that's a broken link. Okay. Anyway, let's keep going. There is, you can just see that it's not as a normal tenancy act or code or something would normally be if it was in a province or a state. As we go through this. So that talks about emotional support animals, service animals, what to do, parking spaces, rent relief. Okay, so this one talks about eviction. So there, rent relief and eviction resources. Again, this is tenant centric. Management company, rental payment assistance, manage. Okay, limit for multiple languages. It talks about speaking with people. What if English is not a first language? Can you get more help? Interesting. So the only other one you can do is you can visit the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which I don't know if that's going to be available, only because I know that the Trump administration is shutting departments like this one down. So I don't know if this is still available, but this one is basically Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. What products and services can I complain about? You can pay just basically anything regarding money. What steps can I take? What happens after I submit? Okay, well, and then you start a new complaint. So I don't know if you'd be able to complain. This looks like it's all financial based. It's not housing based. So that I guess makes sense on that. Federal Trade Commission, Federal Housing Agency, predatory lending. Interesting. Okay, housing quality and improved living conditions. So you've got HUD's resident information brochure. Again, if you'll notice, most of these are federal. Most of these are United States federal stuff that Puerto Rico falls into. But it's not all of them, but most of them are. Lead-based paint, home improvement, available resources. So this is what other resources may be available for me. Visit centers for disease control. Again, a lot of this has nothing to do with housing. Disaster resources. This is a bunch of information that in Puerto Rico, as a landlord, you actually have to take good faith steps to recover a house or a apartment, especially if it's been hit and or damaged, or it's no longer existing because of a hurricane or a wind event, right? So it's really interesting that when you've got a rental in sort of an exposed place like Puerto Rico, what you've got to do. So you've got to make sure you've got that. So a lot of these are just about filing complaints, and most of them have nothing to do with housing. However, if you need more assistance, self-help resources are above, and it says, do you need more help? Call this number. This is in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The phone number is 787-766-5400. Service hours are 9 to 4, Monday through Thursday. And I guess this is Eastern time zone because they are in the Caribbean. Also, you've got all kinds of emergency services support, like domestic violence survivors, 988 suicide and crisis lines, rental homeless eviction help. So this one actually would work. So rental houselessness and eviction help. So if you need any kind of help, findhelp.org. I've actually seen that one before, which is a national website, not necessarily just for Puerto Rico, but it would be good. And then if you need finding a counselor for housing, HUD's housing counseling resources, or you can call 800-569-4287, and they speak multiple languages there. Okay, so that's that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'm just going to finish up this because this is a very interesting location, right? It's, you know, I have my normal list of stuff that I go through that I'm looking for. Tenant application fee. Is there a late penalty? Is there a grace period? Security deposit we talked about. Pre-made forms, I didn't see hardly any. Lease wording and details, yes. There was no talk about pets or animals, service animals, emotional support animals a bit. Delivery of a signed lease, is it required? Again, none of that was stated. Condition inspection, none of it was stated. Standard warnings, not stated. Required maintenance. Rent increase, we did talk about. Renter's insurance, not stated. Is it a fixed lease? Is it ending abruptly, or does it automatically convert? Unknown. I'm assuming that it would be whatever's in the lease. Return of deposit we talked about was 30 days. Can you use the deposit as last month's rent? The answer is no. Landlord retaliation, yes, and it's for the length of the lease, which is actually longer than I've seen. Sometimes, most of the time, there is a time period. It's usually 90 days, or typically it's 6 months. But third-party housing, you go right to court. And nuances in Puerto Rico, I think the whole thing is a nuance. Abandoned items. Now, I found one thing about abandoned items. If a tenant departs in Puerto Rico and leaves property behind, this is what I found, and this is very unusual. I didn't even find it in a document. I just found it in a resource. It says, if the property can not be stored without deterioration, meaning it's stored in a covered space, if a property cannot be stored without deterioration or without making expenses that significantly diminish its value, it will be sold at public auction 8 days after public notice. So you've got to give public notice. If 3 months elapse from the date of public notice and nobody claims it, the property found or its value will be awarded to whoever found it. So this is not even necessarily landlord-tenant. This is just in general, but same thing. Any abandoned property that has a mortgage, like a home, will be subject to a judicial foreclosure process. Until then, the ownership will be retained by its lawful owners. If the property is finally foreclosed, it will become real estate owned, an REO. That's exactly what happens in North America anyway, regardless of location. So this is just Puerto Rico. So again, abandoned items that are involved in a tenancy typically have a dollar value, and below that dollar value can either be stored and then thrown away, or above that dollar value, inventory stored and then with permission can be sold, or the landlord can recoup some of the lost costs. None of that has been spelled out in Puerto Rico. It's kind of a free-for-all. So it said in the very beginning of all this that the majority of the tenancy laws in Puerto Rico are contract law based, and so it was based on precedents, and so not really much guidance, and that's exactly what we've seen. So I do have some help resources, but you can see you basically have to call the national number to get more guidance on there. But you can also go to wherever the city where your rental is and go to that city hall and try to get guidance there as well. I have no idea what you'd find, but it does look like there is more city-based items like rent stabilization and rent control in certain pockets of Puerto Rico. Okay, so that wraps up Puerto Rico. It's really not that much to it. Each of my location-specific podcasts are set up in the exact same way and answer the same 4 questions. 1, what are the basics of that state or province or territory in their governing document? 2, what are the nuances of that location? What's different? 3, what are some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant in a dwelling? And 4, where do you get help in the local area? This is the same format for every location specific episode. So if you're interested in another geographic area, you already know what I'm going to talk about, just in a different location. Now, again, I must tell you this episode is not all inclusive. You must research further in your specific area to make sure that you have corrected and covered yourself as a landlord with a rental in that area. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, chances are that you're either new to real estate in Puerto Rico, or you're about to be in real estate in Puerto Rico, or perhaps you're already down in Puerto Rico. I don't know. But things you can help yourself. Make sure you read as much as you possibly can and ask a bunch of questions in person in Puerto Rico. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of guiding documents, but there may be local help right at the courthouses in these local areas. So ask around. If there's meetups down there, there may be, but it's a very small area. I don't know if they do local meetups down in Puerto Rico or not. You can also jump on social media and ask. There's plenty of landlord forums on Facebook and LinkedIn. So yeah, this is Puerto Rico. My goodness, it was very unusual, very different. I hope you learned something today. And if you did, if you would please give me a review on whatever platform you listen to the show on, that'd be great. I'm recording this episode today in San Antonio, Texas. Why? Because real estate takes you places. And where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode, which is live right now in the library. Episode 143 is all about the Canadian provinces of Newfoundland and Labrador. Thank you. Talk to you soon.